Hello, people. This week I read The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. I'll admit I'm a little bit obsessed right now. This is sort of essentially, not technically, essentially part book 2 in his sort of robot series that leads to Foundation, which is the show that I'm watching. Fantastic show. Normally, I think I'd wait. I try and have more variety, but I got a little impatient, so I YOLO'd. What can you do? In any case, this is book 2. I say essentially because it's not technically. So when he wrote them, he was writing individual stories, and I think at some point along the way, it sort of coalesced in his mind. And then later he has a plan for his story. And then he comes back and sees this fits in this way. I think this is the kind of energy it had. I don't think he set about to do, like, whatever the number of books it is, a series, if you know what I mean. This book is about a murder. But it's not really. Like, the detective part isn't the strong drive to this book at all. The detective parts are a catalyst to move us through sort of the world of tomorrow and what it looks like, full of robots and this kind of energy. It's very fun, just the thoughts you have about that future and seeing it go by. It's very, very fun. Our detective is Lies Bailey, I think that's his name. And there's a murder of a spacer. Spacers being people out in space. And it gives it to you in wonderful drips. So we don't have a section that stops and then just lists out all these things. It'll be in passing, one thought here, another thought there, and your brain can just piece them together as it goes. And what it pieces together is something like 100 years ago ish, maybe 150, there was a type of rebellion. So there's Earth, and then there's 50 outer worlds we've colonized that have a population enough. And, of course, given distance and time, you have various culture shifts that happen. The big one here, for our purposes, is robot versus sort of anti-robot. Earthers being very anti-robot. Spacers being very pro-robot. They've grown more around them. And so I'm assuming at some point there was a war between the two. And it ended in a independence for the Outer Realms. All right, that's just interesting. Because I've read so much history, I feel like the whole war fills in my head, even though I didn't read a book about the war. It's very, very cool. So we now have spacers who are more pro-robot, who are higher technologically than Earth, but Earth has more numbers. I think we outpopulate them combined, essentially. And one of these spacers gets dead, and we want to find out why. And of course, there's this backdrop of politics because it's a spacer, and we wonder, is it related somehow to a new outbreak of a war? What's going on? But there are added elements. It's not just a generic murder. So part of the spacer's request is, because I think in theory they could run it themselves. They wouldn't need an Earth person at all. But they get an Earth guy, our Detective Bailey, and they add one of their detectives, a spacer, what is his name? R. Daniil, who actually ends up being a robot. But the thing is, not just a robot, like a very human-looking one. Because we were always going to make those too, right? And again, this comes with all kind of undertones. If anyone finds out, there could be dangers, there could be riots. It's a very volatile situation with this murder constantly driving it forward. Now, it gives us two sort of zones that we can look at. They're both interesting. They're both just as someone, well, part of the fun of these science fiction books sometimes is this sort of, what do I want to say? The science fiction book can give you a lot. So it can give you spaceships like The Expanse. It can give you, aliens and creatures like a Star Wars, Star Trek, Mass Effect, but it can also sort of give you just this future Earth, and then you can sort of chew on that and imagine it. And that's the fun of this one. There's not spaceships. There's not really laser fire in that sense. There's not a lot of violence. But you get this futurized Earth just to live in. And part of this is New York. Now, what they've done, and it's, for them, glasses, windows, books, physical books, are from medieval times. That's how far in the future they are. Now, it says 1,000 years, but the people's interactions with these objects are what have more of an effect than any of the numbers. So if you say 20 million live in New York, that's not as much of an effect as, that the entire city's domed in. That they don't breathe any fresh air. This kind of energy, it locks it in your brain really well. And that is the reality that they have. And you do wonder, is this a reality that we could get to as human beings? I feel like we could. Which again is always the fun of a science fiction book. Could this be possible? Let me explain. What we have is New York, and it's all the boroughs, all completely domed in. 100% domed in. That means no more weather. You don't have to worry about weather. All transportation is automated in some way. Food. There are no more food shortages whatsoever. Everyone has. Starvation's impossible unless it's self-induced. They eat weird yeast products and hydroponically grown foods. No one's without a place to live. There's a spot made for everyone. Homelessness doesn't exist, whether you have a job or not. But we know, sort of utopia and paradise. Is it possible for people? We're human beings. We don't have it. So what they've done is kind of like your Chinese, if those reports came out with the Chinese are having like a social score, they do the same thing here. So if you're just a homeless person who doesn't want to do anything, you're given a tiny apartment with no amenities and just your basic yeast food. And as you move up and make yourself more useful, you get more things. Our guy applied for a couple's apartment when he got engaged. It's like I gotta go to the DMV and apply for a truck instead of a car because now I haul bricks. Everything I have to ask for, everything's given, but there's a person who can give it or take it away. So if you move up, you can, what does he say? They have a sink in their house as a perk. It says, again, it's our guy's perspective who is born in this era and has only known this. But it's, why have millions of books for everyone when you could have a central book area? Why have kitchens and bathrooms when you could have, communal diners and centralized community shower bathroom situations? This is the world they live in, where everything is. And I'm like, well, in a lot of senses, we aren't that far from that now. We have a lot of people. I bet you wouldn't have to go 100 miles before you found someone who eats out more than they eat at home. Where I feel like when I was younger, it was much cheaper to eat at home than eat out, and now it's sort of homogenizing, wherein it's essentially the same price, so why would I even cook it? And it's getting to where maybe the other's going to be the way to be, where it's cheaper to eat out than to eat at home, between the cost of running whatever cookery you have versus the cost of food, etc., etc. And I feel like the Romans did the same thing, if I remember right, wherein the Romans, I mean, they're Romans. They don't have refrigeration, so I'm going to just have that guy cook all my fish, and he bothers with getting more of it. And some people end up fishermen and haul them food. Same concept, but chucked in the future. And it's really cool to think about, because if we did commit to that, where we said, these negatives we don't like homelessness. Well, it leans towards this communal living. And if you give it 1,000 years, we're talking about eventualities, wherein we don't allow people to be homeless. We don't allow them to starve to death. That'd be a goal humanity would try and get to, but then the reality of it is, you go eat at a diner, and then that diner is tiered. So a common person with no benefit to society eats in the large cafeteria, with automated food pellets that come out. And as you move up, and your senators, your billionaires, your aristocrats, of course, they get beef and pork and fancy exotic foods. But a solid middle-class detective family gets to go to a diner where the wife's happy that you get a little more variety. You get a little more portions. The husband almost looks down on just the concept of beef. Like, why would you slaughter an animal when a yeast-grown beef substitute tastes the same and no animal has to get all bloody and messy? And there's no pathogens or risks. You know what I mean? I'm like, you can just see society locked in on this idea. Very, very, very fun. And it's the whole thing. He doesn't miss any of the bits you would almost want. There's prisons. The lower you are to the ground, the poorer. The richer, the higher up. The higher up, the more space. Your richest people, I think they said, have a kind of a quartz wall in some gardens that allow sunlight in, and so that they can enjoy a sunset or sunrise, but they don't actually, go outside. Our guy sees it almost as like, our guy almost sees it as almost unsanitary, like disgusting. Like, why would you have a window that opens up into a private room? It doesn't make any sense to him. We have communal bathrooms where, of course, the guys don't talk to each other, but the women will conversate a lot. Our wife talks about they have privacy privileges, so they could eat at home because he's been a detective for 10 years. But that too much use of the privacy privileges is sort of looked down on. And that's the other element that's interesting. It's social dynamics. I think I was watching a special one time on some tribe in the Amazon or something to this effect, wherein the point the person was making is more than laws, more than the risk of punishment, a social dynamic has more power to move and place people than anything else. So if you say, this sort of shame will come to you in your community of choice, where you live, the sphere that you have around you, or you take this, punishment from a government, that if they misalign, so if the punishment's 5 years in jail, but the social punishment's harder than that, then the people won't bat an eye about breaking that law and eating that punishment. That the best punishment's a lie. So we don't like murder. Murder has the highest punishment. Sometimes they don't align. Sometimes there's a weird culture shift wherein to do this negative, irrespective of, the outcome. Sort of your Arabs, and it's going to sound harsh, but the weird honor killings they have, or how they will arrange marriages. For them and their social structure in Arab land, that's fine. When they move it to America, it's not fine. But the law doesn't stop them because they're ruled by that social dynamic. The same thing is shown in here, wherein some of his motivations toward the end are to not lose social status, and not just the loss of them. It's not just that he would lose a small water basin, a wash basin in his room, which is a perk. It's that everyone would know that he lost it. It's that he'd have to take more trips to the personals, as they call it, the public bathrooms, and that they would know he used to have and now doesn't. The loss of them socially makes them more of an effect than just, having extra meat, having extra food. They also have a point where the robot is asking him, like, are we secure here? Are we private? And the guy's like, who would listen to another man's conversation in another apartment? Again, another social faux pas. And again, I was reminded of your Japanese, where in old school Japan, where large families would live in one house, and they have those paper walls. You can hear everything. You can hear everything everyone's talking about. But we, as humans, adapt to weird situations all the time. And their adaptation is just to ignore it. Like, pretend you didn't hear that argument. Just in the morning, pretend you don't see, the tear marks or whatever. You just pretend unless they bring it up. And they wouldn't bring it up because it'd be awkward to throw that on that person, etc., etc., etc. The other part we visit, apart from just sort of a large, and we say New York, like completely caged in. I think that's why the book's called Cage of Steel. It's completely locked in. Every person on Earth essentially lives like this. Every major city has incorporated itself into these, large enough. If we need it bigger, we just make it bigger. And the outside world is just left. We still use it for wood and for ranching and for mining, but it's only robots out there. The way he describes it, it's just like it'd be like walking into the Sahara. Yeah, people can go out there, but how many do versus how many live in not the Sahara Desert? It's that energy, but for everything not in town. It's actually pretty cool. The other place we visit is Spacetown. That is, we call everyone from space spacers. They have essentially forced an embassy zone for themselves. They have the technology, what do they call them? Subetheric hand disruptors. I like it. I like it a lot. I'm just imagining, a large crowd getting vaporized or something spacey. Very fun. But they have the tech to have a barrier up of some sort that we can't stop. But they've limited themselves to this small area. And so, him going in there, we learn about them. The spacers, they describe them all as, sort of tall and attractive. And it's because, I guess, technologically, they eat better. They, I'm going to assume some sort of genetic breeding situation, i.e. we clean the DNA so that abnormalities are taken out. I think this type of energy that we have. They are more integrated with robots. They have no fear of it whatsoever. But their big problem is lack of an immune system and underpopulation. Because they don't have sort of the diversity needed. They don't procreate enough. And They were started by people who go into space. And it's, what did they say? It's not like they can eat dirt growing up. It's, babies tend to do this. You get a lot of pathogens in, small, that your body then fights off, and you build yourself an immune system fairly quickly that way. Real life. So in real life, these people are on a planet with no dirt. It's all metal facilities of some kind, sterilized, and they've grown in this, and now we have generations, and they have horrible immune systems. But what they want to do, what these spacers' plan is, overarching, is they've seen that their system can't continue. They can colonize, they have the technology, they can move around. Reintegration will be extremely difficult because of their low immune systems, but they can't subsist on declining populations. Eventually they'll just, the math says, you'll run out. But they've also looked at Earth and said that can't continue either. That without humanity on Earth accepting robots, then the system they have will implode at some point. What does he say? In ancient times, a disaster struck the city, and the people could live infinitely. They all knew how to hunt. They all knew how to fish, etc. Versus now, for him, would be their dome city. But for us, it almost applies. How long could New York last if a disaster hit? Disaster meaning no more power, all the roads are closed, I can't, we're detached somehow or something. The city of New York doesn't grow its own food. Not enough to feed all the people there. They'd all have to leave. The city wouldn't function. So you amplify that out to a domed city that's been this way 200 years. You now have a population that can't. We're not that far off, let's be honest. How many people in New York, if they had to, could hunt an animal down and kill it and eat it? Some just on, tenacity, but the bulk couldn't. And the bulk of the people that couldn't feed the ones that couldn't. This is the problem they see in these steel cities, is that at some point, some disaster is going to strike, and it all is going to implode. And so we have two sort of things that don't work. What our spacers' plan is to merge them. They want to be able to see if an Earth-type person can be convinced of the rationality of living with robots. They then want to colonize, volunteer, pay, however you want to do it. They want a large number of them to colonize a new place with the mix of both. So they would bring that city model to a new space colony that also integrates robots in the inner workings of the people, i.e. spacer meets earther, new type of civilization that can survive. That's the whole reason they sent R. Daniil, this robot, to work with this human detective. The murder was just an excuse. I don't think I... Could I? I think I could. I think I've seen enough how to prepare an animal from alive to, food ready. I could function. But we're not too long away, I don't think, before people would have a serious problem. If there was a break, the pandemic. We because there was no travel between some countries just for a little while, we had this weird backlog of both computers and cars because they both needed computer chips, and we couldn't make enough here. We couldn't make enough ventilators here. We couldn't make enough medicines here because we got our chips from Taiwan and our medicine from China and Germany, etc., etc. We're globalizing at a rate that's completely new. I say completely new. Well, maybe it is, scale-wise. So your Egyptians were globalized in their sense, and your Romans were globalized in their sense. But they weren't all over the world like we can do today. And so it is driving towards a type of time where we're going to have this hole. This, not a hole, a weakness. That we're going to have this weakness to the integration. So if the farmers aren't sending food to the grocery store, I'm going to have a problem now. I can imagine what it'll look like in 100 years. And 100 years isn't that long away. As for the murder itself, like I said, it's mostly secondary to this world-building, thought-provoking future robot story. But our guy cracks the case. I think it ends up being the commissioner, and it was accidental. He's a medievalist. He knew this robot was coming. The problem was the maker of the robot made the robot look like him, so that, it was mistaken identity, etc., etc. That's sort of how it ends. But again, the ideas are much brighter than the murder mystery. Very fun ideas. And that is The Caves of Steel. I'm getting really excited about this series as a whole. I'm going to try and, push them back a little. I'm not going to do, 75 Asimov books in a row here. But I want to. So just know. I'm holding off. Okay, but what I'm not going to hold off on are your beloved ads. These are my books. I don't have a robot book yet. I'm writing one now with a robot in it. But I don't have one yet. These are my books. You can buy them. You can get them on Kindle Unlimited for it'll be like a Spotify of books situation, wherein I get some money from that as well. So either way you want to do it, or you can just watch, you can like, you can subscribe. All the options are open to you. We're fine with whatever you choose. I will see you all next week.